On the left is a 1996 photo of a boarded up house on an empty street in Grindthorpe, northeast England, a pit village that was economically dependent on its closed coal mine. On the right is a polluted river delta in Gokana, Nigeria, home of the Ogoni people. What do these two pictures have in common? They are connected by Britain's neoliberal energy policy of the 80s, which sought to cut costs by replacing domestic union produced coal with foreign oil and gas at the cost of indigenous peoples like the Ogoni, who saw their homes rendered unlivable for decades to come. Today, the world stands at the cusp of yet another energy transition. In the West, coal is dead, and the oil and natural gas which supplanted it may soon make way for nuclear, solar, and wind. As each resource fades into irrelevance, however, it takes with it the livelihoods of the workers who depended on it, and the homelands of the indigenous peoples unfortunate enough to have planted roots near the resource that replaces it. In Nigeria, Ken Saro-Wiwa's struggle lives on with the latest generation of Ogoni activists, which you can learn about in our previous video. In Britain, we are still dealing with the aftermath of the coal transition, how it killed organized labor and the industrial working class. This is the miners' strike of 1984. It is impossible to illustrate the scale of the abscess wrought on Britain's miners in a way that does it justice. For Margaret Thatcher, it was a small price to pay in exchange for the decimation of trade union power, which stood in the way of her free market economics. For Arthur Scargill, president of the National Union of Mine Workers, it was meant to be an apocalyptic class struggle. Britain's industrial class united against Thatcher and the National Coal Board's plan to rip out the country's beating heart. Yet from the start there had been discord. His refusal to allow a national strike ballot had led many to doubt its legitimacy, and Nottinghamshire miners largely refused to strike. The largest wound was opened at the Battle of Orgreave on June 18, 1984. Picketers had gathered facing massed ranks of police, where in a scene reminiscent of the Peterloo Massacre 150 years prior, mounted police repeatedly charged striking miners and smashed truncheons on their heads. Meanwhile, less noticeable cuts were surfacing in every pit community as more and more miners couldn't afford to live. The scale of social support had been massive. Women, in particular, had been instrumental in organizing food parcels and strike centers, while those in mining families took on extra jobs or extended their hours for more income. But however large the strike funds were, it would fail to outlast the government's coal stockpiles in the waiting game. Miners who could no longer face the economic pressure fought with miners who refused to back down. In place of what Scargill called loss without limit, this was death by 1,000 cuts. Cuts to mining jobs, cuts to the social fabric of mining communities, and cuts to each miner's self-concept. Environmental justice activists are used to fighting on the side of indigenous communities, like the Ogoni, against corporations looking to exploit their resources. But the other side of unjust energy transitions, the communities left behind, remains unaddressed. And there is the most uncomfortable question to consider. Is environmentalism fundamentally incompatible with the labor movements of fossil fuel industries? The end of Britain's mining industry was a consequence of the strike, but another was the replacement of coal with less polluting alternatives. If the strike had been successful, would it have led to Britain being more polluted than it is today? George Monbiot, in an opinion piece exchange with Scargill in 2007, seems to think so. On the other hand, there is no real necessity to focus on alternate history. What we must do is focus on the present. The campaign to protect Pont Valley, a group formed to oppose an open cast mine, marched under its banner at the 2018 Durham Miners Gala, next to those that flew proudly in 1984. In Wakefield, the 2022 Yorkshire Miners Gala featured climate change in both its theme and its banners. Solidarity between miners and environmentalists is not just possible, it is happening. So, what is the way forward? We must first cure the malaise in ex-mining communities. Miners were consistently underestimated. I was underestimated, and I therefore underestimated myself. There was a lot of clever lads down the pits, a lot cleverer than me. And I see these lads now, and I don't feel that society has harnessed their ability. They've got to be encouraged to go for it. By encouraging them to use their energy to fight for local causes, environmentalists can let them see that their experiences are not just useful for historians, but for the younger generation of activists as well. Perhaps one day we might just see the old mind spanners flying defiantly in protest once more, alongside those fighting for a livable environment, as both causes join hands for a better future.